Hey viewers, my name's Kara. I'm your host for Tuesdays on the Pagan Perspective, and this week we're talking about thoughts about personal ritual and on recording ritual. This week's topic comes from JustRandomly, who I am just going to refer to as JR if I have to refer to them again by a name, because that seemed like a good abbreviation to me. And the question topic was, open quote, "Hi, there's this Tumblr user who has posted his personal rituals on Tumblr in the form of videos. It's great and has received a lot of positive reactions. I think it'd be great if Pagan Perspective hosts could talk about their personal rituals, at least how they start and end them specifically, and if there are any unique practices or tips they have that they are willing to share. I think this can greatly help those who are just starting in the craft and are confused or stuck on how to go about rituals, parentheses, like me in the beginning, close parentheses. I know there are books and such that talk about this topic, but I know the personal touch from all the hosts can really make a huge difference." End quote. So I just finished watching Rich's video, and he mentioned some great stuff. Actually, before I get started, and forget to do it at the end, I would also like to pass on some love to Megan. Love passed. Now, Rich brought up some interesting things, such as that he would not personally record any of his rituals again, though he has in the past. But that he might watch other videos to get ideas. I put this topic out there as part of it because there are people who record their full rituals for educational purposes, or people who just record their personal rituals and then put them up for whatever their own purposes are. And as Rich mentioned, unless it's a public ritual, which when you're in public, anyone can be recording anything, so that is part of the knowledge of being in that space, is that it is public. And therefore, that can happen. I have recorded snippets of ritual at Pagan Pride, which is a public event. I have participated in those rituals, which I know that people were recording. It's a public event. I'm comfortable with that. That's part of what it is. You're doing it in public. As far as personal rituals go, or even not solitary rituals, but personal group rituals go, I personally am not for recording those because there is an element of it being, well, personal, right? We're talking about personal rituals. There's an element that is private. It's personal to you, and to me, personally, when I turn on a camera and I'm about to do it, if it's for an educational purpose, then the purpose is different. It is no longer my personal ritual for my purposes. It's for the purpose of educating. It takes on a whole different meaning and intention. And even if I'm just going to set up a camera in the corner, do my own personal ritual, but I know I'm posting it, it is no longer a personal ritual. It is no longer a personal connection that is private between myself and my concept of whatever it is. It, to me, becomes a performance when it's being recorded, when it's being observed that way. And so that has a different energy to me, and it's not something that I do. I have done videos in the past that are some demonstrations of things. I've done them for Pagan Perspective. We have talked about lots of things, but I've done a demonstration and I showed it for educational purposes, for demonstrative purposes. But that energy is totally different. That is me showing you. If you were a personal student of mine and we were working one-on-one privately and it's not something being recorded for other people, then I would share things with you because it's a student-teacher relationship going both ways, because I also learn from people. Yeah, as far as recording rituals just like this, like if I were just to do a ritual and record it with my camera in the corner and post it, that is not something that I personally am interested in doing. And contrary to Rich, I don't watch those types of videos. If I happen to come across something that seems more like a fly on the wall at someone's personal ritual than it does a demonstration, like the one that's coming to my mind is Annie in the past had done a Pagan Perspective video for us, showing us her different hand gestures that she personally uses in her practice as part of connecting with the elements or invoking the elements. That was a demonstration, even though she was actually closing her eyes and getting into it and doing it for us on the camera. It was very much, the intent was that it was a demonstration. I watch things like that, because I occasionally do things like that too, but I have no interest in peeping in on someone else's personal ritual. I've seen groups that, if you've seen them, you probably know what I'm talking about. This is from years ago. I've seen groups that post rituals online purposely as kind of they're trying to stir the pot kind of thing, or they're trying to get people to see what they're into. Those groups in general are more putting themselves out there. That's more their purpose. That's what they're trying to do. So I've watched one of those that had to do with like a news article just to see what it was about, but it's not, it felt weird. It didn't feel real to me. They know they're doing this to be recorded. And it might have felt real to them doing it, actually being in it, but to me it was like, why? Why am I watching this? That's my personal take on recording ritual. I don't do it. I don't particularly watch it. I don't mind demonstrating little things. And I certainly don't mind talking about things. That's the way that I prefer to do it. On Pagan Perspective and on my personal channel, I've talked about circle casting, I've talked about elements, I've talked about deity, I've talked about invocations, I've talked about ritual baths, I've talked about so many different elements of ritual. I'm pretty sure I've talked about the order of ritual and like what steps come first and literally what you do first and what you do last. Talked about a lot of stuff, and that to me, I get ideas that way, and I know that people get ideas from me that way, so I think that that is sufficient. If you really do want to watch someone else perform a whole ritual in order to see what they're doing, then clearly they're out there, and that's something that you can seek out. But for me personally, I didn't do any of that as I was learning, and believe me, Rich said he could relate to this topic, to this questioner, and I can too. I think we all can. Any of us who were not raised as a pagan and were not taught it coming in, or even if you weren't raised in it, anyone who didn't have a direct mentor type situation to bring you into it and show you every step of the way. Any of us who have kind of self-taught can relate to this, that you're confused about some things at first and it doesn't make sense, but to me, that, there are, like you said, JR, there are so many books that describe it, there are videos that describe it verbally, there are blogs that describe it, and for me that was totally sufficient, and it didn't feel like it was at the time, so it's gonna feel like, I don't know what I'm doing, but it really was, because you read it, and authors often will give you little examples of things to say. Even I, in some of my videos, have said, oh, then I'll say something to the effect of this, and I'll give you an example. Take that, try doing it exactly as it says in the book, and if it doesn't say something specific, particular, and you're like, what about this? Just do something there. Something will happen. Just follow what feels like should happen there. And I've talked about this in the past too, that when I've done that sometimes I have found that later on, going to a public ritual, working with other people, that I learned it on my own that way, feeling it out, learned it the same way that people who were taught it learned it. Trust it. Trust the system, really. It's good. It's gonna work if you're tapped in, and you will. And if you're not now, you will later, because at first, no. Trust the system. That's my message. Trust the universe. So anyway, in the last couple of minutes of this video, I want to talk about addressing the exact topic, how do I start and end ritual? Well, there are many different ways that I could start and end ritual. It depends on what it is, right? So I want to give you an example with something like a book or a play. How would I begin? Well, for me personally, I'm the kind of person who loves to read covers. So I look at the cover, figure all that out, and then I flip it over. The first thing I do is look at the back and read the description of a book and figure out what's going on in it. And that, in this analogy, is kind of equivalent to coming up with a plan for your ritual if it's not going to be an improvisational ritual. This is equivalent to me to figuring out, what is this ritual for, what is my intent. I might come up with my intent, I might come up with the stuff I'm going to do, like I'm going to do a trance, or I'm going to do yoga in the middle of it, or I'm going to do this, or I'm going to take a ritual bath beforehand, or I'm going to do whatever. Like, coming up with that plan, to me, is equivalent to reading the back of the book, or reading the fly leaves, which are the inside little sections. Then, the first thing I would do to actually begin it is open it up to the first page. Look at what's there. Look at what's on the next page, title page. Keep going. I might read the note. I might skip over that. I might skip over a preliminary thing. Maybe in this case that could be equivalent to casting your circle, because not everything that you're doing is going to require you to cast a circle in your own view. You may want to, you may not. So maybe that's equivalent to that. Now when I actually get to the cast list is important for me to read personally, and then starting I would like to also give you a quote from one of my elders, Lewis Carroll, who writes, "Begin at the beginning," the king said gravely, "and go on till you come to the end. Then stop." The Adventures of Alice in Wonderland. I think that's perfect. How do you start and end? Begin at the beginning, go on till you get to the end, then stop. You might have a plan for it ahead of time, like I said, back of the book, or it might be improvisational. You might have a structure, such as Act 1, Scene 1 is followed by Act 1, Scene 2, Act 1, Scene 3, etc. Midway through, you have intermission, if it's a 2-act play, and then you have more scenes, and then you reach final scene. After the final scene, what happens? After the final scene, there might be something little, there might be a reprise, there might be something fun that happens in that show, and then there's curtain call. The actors come out and they bow. They take their bows, they get applause, they leave the stage. But then there's more after that, right? They go in the back, they change out of their costumes, they get into their regular clothes, the patrons are leaving the house, they're exiting. You know, it's not the end of the world, but it's the end of the ritual. So, with all these analogies, sometimes I like to begin ritual with, before any of that happens, with something like a ritual bath or anything like that. But then when I get to the ritual itself, I want to do something that is getting into that space. When it's me acting, it's when you're in places, off stage, and I'm kind of mentally preparing. I'm, getting into that space for I'm about to walk on stage and you're getting ready for it. You're just preparing your space. And then you're going to, when you're actually ready to begin, do whatever it is that to you is the first step of ritual. You can look up a typical Wiccan ritual setup, you can look up a Druid ritual setup, a Norse ritual setup, whatever. You can find that kind of thing in books and online. You might already have an idea of that. That's very common. That's how I started, is by looking at the usual lineup. So it might be cleansing of self, cleansing of space, then casting your circle, calling the elements, invoking deity. Whatever that order is, you start at the top. You start with whatever is your first step. Personally, like I said, it depends. I feel like I'm just saying the same thing over and over. Might be casting a circle. Might be just making some kind of sound. Might be ringing a bell. It might be just getting into the space and taking a deep breath. Forming a tone of sound. Something just to get me in that space. It might be lighting a candle. In the UU church, in services, sometimes we open with an opening hymn. Then we have a call to worship, some form of verbal thing that's like, hey, we're starting. And then we light the chalice, and that is like the official, okay, like we're in that sacred space now. And then we have other stuff. There's welcomes and announcements. There's a bunch of things that signal, okay, we're starting. Then you have a bunch of meat and tofu, right, in the middle of the ritual, and the body, if you will, or the spirit, however you think of it. Then when you get to the end, okay, what's near the end of your setup? Maybe you want to ground the energy. If you've done any energy raising, you might want to ground it or send it to wherever it needs to go first, then ground the excess. You might want to do a simple feast, some kind of actual eating and drinking thing. You might want to, for me, like skipping all the way to the end, if I've cast a circle, I open the circle. After I have already thanked everyone and released anyone that I've welcomed, I open the circle. Then I might clean up. I don't know. I might do something that is opposite of how I started. So if I cast a circle, I open the circle at the end. If I called anyone in, I release them at the end before I open the circle. It's reverse of the order that you started in. If I began with a meditation, I might end with a little thought to release. If I started with a sound, I might end with a sound. If I started with, the only thing that isn't reversed is like whatever you consider the beginning of actual proper ritual, like the thing that got you into that space. After I've undone that, like I wouldn't go and take another ritual bath at the end if I took a ritual bath before, because that's just something that is preparatory. That's not the part of the bookends. Does that make sense? So there are lots of ways you could do it. Like I said, I've done lots of videos about other specific things, so I'm not going to get into all of that here also because this video is already long. So I'm not getting into all that. But it's really, again, if you were my personal student, I might be like, today we're going to do one like this, and I might just let you see what that's like, and I might bring you through other things, and, let's show you some other things, let's try some different things. Or I might ask you what sounds good to you, and then we'll try a certain thing. But as far as you, just on your own, working things out, I did it, a lot of us did it, and it's totally doable. I know it seems weird now. Like, there are videos where I've read early entries from my Book of Shadows journal about my first rituals and how I was like, it was a failure, I didn't know anything, I did everything wrong. It's gonna happen. It's gonna happen. And yes, I do think that there are some things that you should research and be familiar with before you jump into starting to do an entire ritual, because like I experienced, if you're not familiar or at least have an idea of how to cast a circle and open it at the end, then maybe don't include that in your ritual. Tip, hint, try just casting a circle and being in it and then closing it and not doing anything else within it. Just get comfortable with each of those elements first, and then when you go to do it, it'll be much easier. And if you're the kind of person, especially when you're beginning, who forgets what you did in the beginning, it's good to have a plan, number one, if you want to, but I would actually keep a printed list of these are the steps of my ritual, so that when you're done with your meditation and you've been doing it by yourself and you're like, okay, I feel good, or I feel weird, or I have questions, or like whatever you feel like at the end, so that you're not like overwhelmed with what's going on and forget, you can just look down and say, okay, what did I say I was going to do after this? And then your list will tell you, oh, after the meditation, ground. Good idea, then you do it. And then after that it says, okay, now I get to eat my cookies, yes, cookies. So then you do that. And after that it says, thank everybody, release everybody, okay, you do that. And then it says open the circle. Okay, now it's time to do that. Like, do that. Just do it. Just write it down. So personally, I felt that it was easier for me to work off of a plan in the beginning, so that it did help me learn that, because now I can kind of just do that on my own. I'm like, okay, how did I start? Or maybe, how do I want to end it? I don't know. It's just what feels final to you. What makes you feel like ritual has begun? And what makes you feel like that's the end? It has a nice closure. The ends are tied up. Nothing is flitting around loose. Whatever it is for you. Anything can become a ritual like that. Just like my videos, I begin with, hi viewers, my name's Kara. And I end them with, thank you very much for watching. And until next time, don't forget to be awesome, blessed be, and goodbye.